we are a diverse group now. We were diverse when we were captured. We're even more diverse now. We're intermixed, we're intermingled, we're very diverse in terms of the gods that we worship, how we worship, neighborhoods we come from, so forth and so on. So we are a diverse group of black people. We have to respect that. And we live here within the United States. Party members are not required to adhere to any singular culture, ideology, religion, or philosophy. I call myself Muslim. You ain't got to be Muslim to join this party. My brother's Christian. That's my brother. Right? You ain't got to be Christian to join the party. Right? So I'm saying how it's like that. That's who we are. Party members are required, now this is what you are required to do. You are required to actively support the national platform and your national as well as your local leadership. And you are required to actively support their local agendas. Those are the requirements. We don't care how you wear your hat or whether you wear a hat at all. We don't care what day of the week you worship in. It could be Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. It's up to you. As long as you do this, we all good. Next slide. Major influence for us have been the teachings of Marcus Garvey, the teachings of Malcolm X, the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinator, I should say Student National or Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, two different names, two different types of organizations depending on what period of history you're referring to, the Black Panther Party, and the Republic of New Africa. Those are the major groups, individuals, and organizations that have influenced who we are as an independent black political party. Next slide. Discussion. And so once again, this is a standard presentation that we would do for PE class, right? So at this point, we would ask the group questions, you know, what are the three major characteristics of the NAIP? Anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. Three main characteristics. What type of party are we? We're a mass political party. When was the NAIP started? 2012, officially launched 2014. What historic folks and organizations been the major, you know, influence, I'm trying to go through it quickly. I know you guys know a lot of this stuff. You probably teach a lot of this stuff in your own groups and formations and circles. Next slide. So, we call ourselves New African because we originated from the many tribes, nations, ethnicities, and religions throughout the African continent, but we have been united through the common experiences of being captured, process of enslavement, the resistance to that enslavement, and our current efforts for survival. We are connected to the contiguous states and territories of the southern United States. And some people say, what do you mean by that? Okay, it's the best way I could make my point. Let me see a show of hands how many people here in this room right now, what's up, brother, have parents or grandparents who were born or raised in the South. Look around. Keep the hands up and look around. That's why we call ourselves New Africa. Okay? Straight up. The vast majority of black people to this very day still live in the South. And for those brothers and sisters who come from the islands, about 400,000 brothers and sisters came from the islands in the early part of the 20th century. Most of them some came to Philly, but most came to New York. And that was part of one of those waves of the black migration. We are shaped and molded over centuries of oppression and struggle. So we just haven't been oppressed, we've been rumbling. And so through the process of being oppressed and fighting back, we develop a different type of African, and that's why we call ourselves a New African. Just like New York is named after a place, York County in the UK. And before it was called New York, it was called what? New Amsterdam. Because that's what New York used to be. It used to be a Dutch colony. And they named it after a place up in Dutch land called Amsterdam. And just like them guys are still mad about that bad play, New Orleans Saints, Orleans is a place in France, right? And just like New Haven up in Connecticut is named after a place in the UK. And just like that whole area that Tom Brady's gonna be representing tomorrow, it's called what? New England, right? So we are New Africans. So I try to break it down that way so folks can understand why we chose that particular designation. and it wasn't ours. We got it from the Republic of New Africa. Again, a major part of the influence. Next slide. Red, black, and green. I ain't got to say too much about this to this crowd here. Next slide. The Black Panther. Many of you know about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. It's founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. Some people may not know about the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, right? The original Black Panther Party. Okay, so we start from that point. So if you look at one of our posters here, for example, we talk about join the Black radical political tradition. A major part of that tradition, and this is like a graphic representation of how we see it as far as history. So Malcolm put the call out there, and technically we could even say that Marcus Garvey put the call out before Malcolm, because one of the things that Marcus Garvey did when he got back to Jamaica, he started an independent black political party called the People's Party. A lot of people don't know that. Marcus Garvey started a black political party too, after UNIA, right? So Marcus really put out the call, and we all know that Malcolm was the son of Marcus through his mother and his father, who were both Garveyites, right? So technically it starts with Marcus Garvey, then we get Malcolm, right? Malcolm transitioned, and then we get it picked up. That whole struggle is picked up through the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, as you can see here, right? And this brother here, and the organizing of Ella Baker. And then there was a political challenge to the Southern Democratic Party, and that political challenge was made in 1964 when the Democratic Party had their national convention. And Sister Fannie Lou Hamer, leading the push, went to Atlantic City and said, hey, this particular party, this Mississippi Democratic Party, does not represent everyone. And so they had started their own thing called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was mostly black. But that did have a few white supporters and a few white members, right? And so they challenged the Democratic Party's national convention in Atlantic City. This is 1964, right? And there were some compromises made that some compromises attempted that they were not willing to accept. To make a long story short, this is a history of how this stuff developed. And then we see, for example, there was symbolic political representation in the Black Panther Party in the very early years. Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen Cleaver running for political office. Basically symbolism, they were running through a group called the Peace and Freedom Party, which was a radical white formation on the West Coast, which still exists. Peace and Freedom Party is still alive and kicking. They supported the Black Panther Party, and so this is just basically symbolic. Then we get to Sister Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black woman to run for the presidency, right? And then we get, a little later on, we get a little bit more serious efforts coming through the Black Panther Party. This is actually, you know, as the Black Panther Party was kind of getting into a new era, and they became a little bit more serious about using politics, electoral politics. However, this is my humble criticism, is that they should have formed an independent electoral party instead of running through the Democratic Party, okay? And then we see the same type of expression some years later with people from the Republic of New Africa under Brother Chokwe Lumumba, okay? The brothers and sisters from the Republic of New Africa, the New African People's Organization, and the Malcolm X Grassroots Committee, and their effort to post a viable candidate, namely Brother Chokwe Lumumba, to run for city council down in Jackson, Mississippi. They were successful. And then later on, he ran successfully to become a mayor. Again, my critique, our critique, is that after having been in what we call the territory for over 3 or 4 decades, they should have had an independent black political party and not run through the Democratic Party. But nevertheless, these are some of the things that have happened. Then at the tail end, you see yours truly, I ran to become a county council person up in Allegheny County. Pittsburgh is a county seat. I wasn't successful, but it was the first time that we ran. We got 12% of the vote, which was a victory within itself, right? So this is a graphic representation of what we mean when we say using politics to advance black liberation. And it goes back to the symbol of the Black Panther and the history behind it. Not just the Black Panther Party under Huey and Bobby, but the Black Panther Party as a political symbol of the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. Next slide, please. Politics. We define politics as the struggle concerning the acquisition and distribution of power and resources. Politics is not just pushing a button or pulling the lever. Politics is ultimately about who's going to get the power, who's going to control the resources, how's that power going to be distributed. That's what politics really is. Politics defines how you, well, first of all, whether your trash or garbage is going to be picked up. That's political. Politics is how the police come to your neighborhood to look for me. I live in your neighborhood. So if the police come to your neighborhood looking for me doing this, we have a warrant here from Mr. Khalid Raheem. I'd like to talk with you about it. Right? That's political. Now, if the police come to your neighborhood doing this, kicking the door, gas, guns, children on the floor, women on the floor, that's political too. Everything is political. Whether it's how the police interact with your community, or whether or not they pick up the garbage, or whether they shovel the snow. Everything is political. So when people say, I don't deal with politics, well, you ain't got to deal with politics. Politics deal with you. And we see that every day. You ain't got to deal with political stuff, but it's going to deal with you. How you going to say you can't be political, but you got a job or you run a business and you pay taxes? So you giving somebody else the power to take your money and do whatever they want to do with it. They could go start another war. They can drone a whole country. They can drop bombs on people. They can hire more police to oppress you in your neighborhood, and then you turn around and say, well, hold it, brother, I don't deal with nothing. I don't deal with politics, brother. Okay, well, don't deal with politics. Politics is going to continue to deal with you. So everything is political. Our lives are shaped and influenced by politics. Where we are born, where we go to school, the neighborhood we live in, our social and our economic status. Where we are born. Politics shape where we were born, because our mom was part of a big family from down south in South Carolina, and our mother was born during the Great Depression. And because of the economic climate of Jim Crow, right, and because of all the problems that black folks were having, her being one of the younger girls in her big family, and also our grandfather was a hard guy to deal with, right? They migrated. They said, we got to get out of here. Right? We had uncles who stood up to the white man, right? So they had to get out of there. Everything is political. Everything is truly politics. Next slide. Both mainstream political parties have failed to address the plight of black or New African oppression within the context of white supremacy and economic injustice. Both Democrats as well as Republicans are parties of white supremacy. Now, I know for a lot of hardcore Democrats, that's a hard bullet to bite, but it's the truth. Just as the brother here said, not just in Philadelphia, but in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, in Detroit, in New York, in Atlanta, in Chocolate City, or used to, well, it's Fudge City now, District of Columbia. You look at all of them. Over the last 40, 50 years, who's been in charge, basically? Not the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party. Now, true, on the governor's level, Republican governors, state house, Republican governors, in some situations, right? But on the local level, city, county, it's been Democratic Party. And they've been just exploiting the black vote, using it to stay in power, to serve their own particular interests, so they could deal with their own brand of what it means to be a white supremacist. Because see, the white supremacy coming from the Democratic Party is just as dangerous to the black community as the white supremacy coming from the Republican Party. One is sweet and one is bitter. They both gonna kill you. Again, we currently have thousands of black elected and appointed public officials, but still no justice. Contrast that, and I don't remember the number just off the top of my head, but say like in 1960, we had literally maybe 200 black public officials across the whole United States of America in 1960. Now we got thousands of them. Now we got people saying, I want to be president in 2020, and already two of the top 7 or 8 But two of the top contenders out of the field at 8 already are 2 black people. 1 black man and 1 black woman, right? But still, look at the condition of the black community. Now, I'm gonna say something about President Obama, and I'm gonna say it, and I want you to think about what I'm getting ready to say. I don't want y'all to get mad at me. This is Politics 101, what I'm getting ready to tell you. Then I want you to think about President Obama. This is Politics 101. Politics 101 in any country in the whole world. I don't care how large the country is. I don't care how small it is. I don't care how well developed it is. I don't care whether their gross national product is off the chart or it's like they're going to market every Friday. Any country around the world, Politics 101 is this. If I come from a people within the country who have historically been oppressed and exploited, and if by some chance of the draw like a, lot, whatever happens, vote, selection, whatever, I, as a member of that particular group, am now the king, or the ruler, or the emperor, or the president. Guess what? Folks in my group got the pressure that exploitation either is going to stop or it's going to drastically be reduced. That's Politics 101. Having said that, I want you to think about President Obama. What happened after President Obama became president? You ain't got to say it. Just think about it. Think about Trayvon Martin, right? Think about the young sister from up in Detroit, Ayanna Jones. Think about Michael Brown. Think about Tamir Rice. And think about numerous cases here within the city of Philadelphia that I've heard about. I hear about it all the way back home in Pittsburgh. Think about it. So, Politics 101 in any society, whether it's highly developed or underdeveloped. If my people have been oppressed, but I become the king, my people gonna be okay now. And if my people ain't treated right, there's gonna be something, people have to pay the cost for that, right? Ask yourself why that didn't happen with our people, who are supposed to be his people as well. There's a reason for that. And we'll talk about that another time. Next slide. Discussion. What do we mean by New African, the colors? You guys know this. Move on. Next slide. We want freedom. We define freedom as the power to determine the destiny of our families, neighborhoods, and communities, the power to determine the form, type, and function of all the institutions that impact our lives. For example, businesses, schools, and our relationship to the police, if any. Freedom from poverty, ignorance, racism, white supremacy, homelessness, as well as social disease, and unmitigated or unchecked state violence. This is how we define freedom. We define freedom in very specific, tangible ways, because we want people to say, well, okay, well, this is what it means to be free. You ever heard, it's an old song. Some of the young people, you may not know it. The older folks, you remember Nina Simone, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. Right? She was talking about the feeling. We want to make it much more material, much more tangible. This is how we define freedom. Next slide. So, I'm now dealing with some of the key points of our platform. And the first part of our platform, we call for the abolition and dismantling of white supremacy. And we define white supremacy no differently than how other people define it. A lot of people get caught up on the color thing, right? We say, nah, that's not necessarily it. It's a major part of it. So we define white supremacy as the structures, the systems, and the institutions which legitimize, empower, and perpetuate the ideas and the ideals and practices of white racial superiority. Racism for us is an attitude. Racism is an attitude, belief, and behavioral predisposition based on notions of racial superiority or inferiority. And last but not least, we say that the racism of whites is only significant because of white supremacy. And so a lot of people don't understand that, right? So this is the best way that I can describe it. So we know what happens, like, if I'm coming through the airport, and if it's a white person, it's a white woman, for example, and I walk by her, she brushes by me, and she hollers and screams, I think he took something out of my purse. Well, all the police gonna immediately turn, and they may react to that. Okay, that's to be expected, right? Now, how do you think it would be if I'm in the airport in Ghana or Tanzania, right? And there's a white woman who grabs her purse as I brush against her and says, I think you stole something from my purse. What do you think the response of the police is going to be? It's going to be a little different. And the reason I say that, you could take the same white woman. She could have been a white woman who left Pittsburgh or who left Philadelphia and traveled with me to Ghana. Not with me personally, but traveled in the same coach plane, whatever, with me to Ghana. But the response is going to be different because in Ghana, her racism doesn't have that type of power. You see what I'm saying? Her racism has that type of power here within the United States. It doesn't change. She's still a racist. She's a racist when she's on the ground in Philly or Pittsburgh. She's a racist when she's on the ground in Ghana. She's a racist when she's flying in the air. She's still a racist. But her racism doesn't have that type of authority or power when she's in different parts of the African diaspora. But it has that power here. And that's what we mean by white supremacy. And so we have to be clear about how we define white supremacy. Because a lot of people got it all twisted. They think it's one thing and it ain't. But they're describing it as racism. So people say, well, we're going to fight against racism. I say, good luck. Because what you're fighting against, again, attitude, belief, behavioral predisposition. Now, you can challenge people on it, but to say you're going to fight against it, good luck with that. The only way you can effectively change this type of stuff is you have to go back and do what? You got to change the structures, the systems, and the institutions. Because those are the things that give the power to people's personal beliefs and dispositions. If you don't change that, you'd be fighting an endless battle to the day you breathe your last breath, saying you're fighting against racism. Next slide. We want reparations. And I'm going to get into this a little later on, but basically we want reparations for slavery, for state-sanctioned terrorism, and for Jim Crow, as well as some other things. Next slide. Political prisons, freedom for all political prisoners, especially those in the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, American Indian Movement, and anti-imperialist movement allies and comrades, as well as politicized prisoners. Next slide. Discussion, how do you define freedom? What is the difference between racism and white supremacy? What is reparations? Blah, blah, blah. Next slide. Proportional representation. We believe and we advocate for something called proportional representation. Proportional political representation, proportional economic representation, as well as proportional judicial representation. And I'll keep it real simple. We make up 13 to 15% of this country's population. How many black U.S. senators do we currently have? We got 3. We got the gentleman from South Carolina. We got Cory Booker from New Jersey, right? And we got Kamala Harris from California. So if we were to embrace proportional political representation, then we would always be guaranteed 13 to 15% of all U.S. senators. And the U.S. Senate is the most powerful legislative body within the country, right? So 13 to 15% would mean we would always have 13 to 15 U.S. senators. Same thing with the governors. How many black governors we got now? I think we got 0. How do we have 0 black governors in 2019 in a country that we built? That doesn't make any sense. So one of our battles, just like our ancestors and some of us battled, right, to break down and to end Jim Crow, we have to fight now for proportional political representation. Proportional political representation on a judicial level. How many federal judges are there? There are hundreds of federal judges. Because we make up 13 to 15% of the country, we would advocate that we be guaranteed 13 to 15% of all federal judgeships. That would help us to get justice, especially when we have to deal with appellate courts, federal appellate courts, especially those of us who are still dealing with drug offenses. So this is real stuff. You talk about economic development, same thing. Apply it to your local situation. Now, I don't know what the demographics are for Philly, but I'm going to share some of the demographics for Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, right? Blacks in Pittsburgh are anywhere from 27 to 30% of the city's population. We make up 13 to 15% of the county's population. However, you don't see that reflected in the contracts that are awarded for construction and economic development. You see what I'm saying? That's what we demand when we say proportional representation. If our numbers are 13 to 15%, we want 13 to 15% of all the contracts, all the construction work, all the professional contracts, not just construction contracts, professional contracts. Stop giving all the contracts for accounting and bookkeeping and engineering to just the white guys. Give it to the black guys too. Next slide. War on drugs, mass incarceration, everybody should know about that. Next slide. Jobs and economic development, we call for what we call a comprehensive King Malcolm Chavez plan in honor of Dr. King, Malcolm X, and Cesar Chavez. We want to include that element, that demographic in it as well, because they deserve it. Proportional economic participation. So we just talked about that. I used the example of like Pittsburgh. We 27 to 30% like of the city's population, but you don't see that reflected. They got all this construction stuff going on. You don't see no brothers and sisters working on the site. But we got to pay taxes. Think about that. They taking your tax money and using it to feed other people. Now these are projects that are federally funded or locally taxpayer funded projects. So we got to step up our game. We talk about dealing with politics. This is real politics. We want the money. We want the money based on our numbers and demographics. What's the black population for the city of Philadelphia today? Anybody know? 51%. So that means that blacks should get 51% of all the contracts. You should demand that. You should demand that anytime anything is being built with taxpayer dollars, if it's funded in any way, shape, or form by any taxpayer dollars, you should demand we want 51% of all the contracts. And then you can structure it any way you want, based on the neighborhood demographics and so forth and so on. Next slide. Discussion, numbers and percentages of blacks or new Africans who live in your city or county. Explain proportional representation. What is the war on drugs and how is it connected to mass incarceration? I'll say briefly, our perspective is that the war on drugs was a tool and a characteristic of mass incarceration. And that mass incarceration itself is really like a political phenomenon. It's been used, it's been used throughout the course of history. Most recently, you can look at the situation involving the Jews. You can look at the situation involving the Japanese, right, here within the United States, where during Franklin Roosevelt's administration at the outset of World War II, he signed like an executive order which basically led to the roundup of all Americans of Japanese descent. Even those who have been born here, they all were rounded up and placed in internment camps. And guess what happened? Years and years after that, World War II came to an end. Years and years later, courts ruled that the Japanese would do what? Say the word. They would do what? Say it again. Right. Years and years after World War II came to an end, International Court ruled that the Jewish population was due what? Say it again. Okay, so how is it that your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, your ancestors, after 400 years, and this is their 400th year, 2019 represents that proverbial 400 years that we used to talk about when we were younger. This is their 400th year. Now I know there were Africans who were here before, but we're talking about Africans who were here as indentured servants and slaves. We're not talking about Africans who came here as explorers to do trade and so forth and so on. But it's been 400 years. So if the Japanese got reparations, if the Jewish community, through establishing their independent, even though I don't like how they establish it, the reality is they have an independent nation state called Israel, right? So if they get reparations, and if reparations, and this is something else a lot of people may not realize. Do you realize that there's certain countries like Germany, for example, the unified Germany, that is still paying reparations to Israel to this day? Did you know that? Israel's still getting paid reparations for a war that ended over 75 years ago. And Obama gave him some more. And also, every year, through its foreign aid program, the United States awards at least $1 billion every year to Israel. And the Israeli lobby is one of the strongest political lobbies in this country. So when we talk about politics, everything is political. We have to develop a domestic perspective. We got to develop an international perspective as well. Does that make sense? Next slide. Formerly incarcerated and convicted, which I am one of those people. So, general amnesty, restoration of human and civil rights, and we need to remove all the collateral consequences and barriers to personal redemption, reform, and rehabilitation. I'll sum it up this way. I want y'all to think about this. About 10, 11, maybe 12 states in 1860 or 1861 seceded from the United States of America and declared war. They called themselves the Confederate States of America, CSA. They made their own uniforms, elected their own officials, printed their own money, armed themselves up, and went to war. In essence, the war was about their right to keep our ancestors in servitude and slavery. I'm very grateful that they lost the war. But guess what? Even though they waged a war against the federal government with arms, even though the Civil War was the bloodiest American conflict on American soil, some people say 700 to 800,000 people died. I say more like 1 million. The biggest and bloodiest battle was right here within the state of Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. That's what set off Lincoln making that great speech that everybody quotes. He didn't make that speech because he said, damn, this is a good day to make a speech about the war. He made that speech because he recognized the enormity of the sacrifice and the bloodshed. Over 1 million people died. But guess what? After everything was said and done, the guys who used to belong to the CSA, the Confederate States of America, they received amnesty. Their right to vote was restored. Their right to bear arms was restored. And their right to hold public office was restored. All of it. Do your research. There's a dude who used to be a U.S. senator or congressman before the Civil War, right? When the war started, he went with the Confederacy. After the war was over, guess what his new job was? He was a congressman again. Okay? So contrast that with folks that you know, maybe you got busted 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago for something that you may not even remember what it was all about. And now you can't get a decent paying job. And now you can't work in a certain profession. And now you can't be qualified to get a loan if you want to go to school, college, university, or training program. Or now you can't get into a housing project. But meanwhile, we got white boys and white girls who over 100 years ago fought against the government, lost, and got everything restored. Everything. Voting rights, right to hold public office, right to own property, and right to bear arms. Think about how insane that is. For you to be told today, because you got busted with some crap 25 years ago, right, that you ain't got no voice for the rest of your life. So those are the kind of challenges that we have to raise when we talk about freedom, real freedom for the formerly incarcerated. Our position is that formerly incarcerated people, after they pay their so-called debt, their rights should be fully restored, even the right to bear arms. Because if some dudes is trying to shoot me, I can't say, hold it, dude, don't shoot me, I'm on parole, I can't shoot back. Like you gonna say, oh, okay, brother Khalid, I'll see you when they restore your right again. Or I'm gonna call the police and they're gonna arrest him and me. And that's usually what happens. So we want all the rights restored. There's brothers and sisters right now in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh who are highly qualified to run for office, who can't run for public office. No, let me take that back. I'm not telling the truth. Show you how crazy the state law is for Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, you can be a formerly incarcerated or convicted person, you can run for office. But guess what? If you win, you can't take your seat. I know you think that's crazy, it is. But according to Pennsylvania law, you have the right to run for public office, but if you win, if you luck up and win, they won't let you take your seat. That happened to a brother right here in Pennsylvania recently. He ran from a small town. He became the mayor. Right? He was holding the office down. Some people challenged him and the judge ruled you have to vacate your seat immediately. This brother had a conviction from a bar fight from like, I think 1985 or something. He turned his whole life around. He ain't killed nobody. He got into a rumble with a dude at the neighborhood bar. Aggravated assault. They said, well, I'm sorry, sir, you know, you're a great candidate, and we respect your right to run for office, and surprisingly, you won. His people voted for him, the people in the community. He became the mayor for the town. They said, he's our mayor, he's a great person. Whatever he did 30, 40 years ago doesn't matter. Look at him now. The court ruled that based on Pennsylvania statute, Pennsylvania law, this man could not take his seat. And that happened recently here within the state of Pennsylvania. For those who got your smartphones and all, look it up for yourself. I can't remember the brother's name. He was a black man too. Next slide. Education. Our areas of concern are financing, curriculum, personnel, the method, and the school consolidations and closings. Those are our areas of concern when it comes to education for our people, for our youth. Educational models that we would consider and promote: public schools, community-based schools, home schools, charter schools, technical and trade schools. We don't close the door for any mode or form of education. Some people say no to charter school. Well, if public schools were all great, there'd be no need for us to even look at a charter school. But if charter schools are owned and operated by the people in the community, we should support it. Now, if it's one of those professional corporations where people buying stocks and bonds to see who can get the most value out of the charter school that's being basically funded by the government, hell no. But we do believe in charter schools that are owned and operated by you, owned and operated by the people, where you can sit on the board of directors. 2 of my children went to a charter school back home in Pittsburgh. It was community-based charter school. The charter school was in our neighborhood, called the Manchester neighborhood, on the north side of Pittsburgh. Just to give you an idea of where I live. My brother will tell you, I know you guys don't like the Steelers and all that, and that's all good. I debate with my brother about it all the time. But here's the bottom line. I live blocks away from the Steelers Stadium, right? And so we have a neighborhood called Manchester. We have a Manchester academic charter school. My 2 younger girls went to that school. I was on the board of directors for 3 years. My job was to focus on financing, curriculum, personnel, method, and all that other stuff. That's my job as their dad, and that's what I did. I wanted to make sure that my children and the children who were their contemporaries and friends got the best form of education they could possibly get, in the best type of environment they could possibly receive. So that's the models, those are the models that we look at. Public schools, most of our kids continue to go to public schools. We need to fight for quality schools within the public environment. We need to fight that tax dollars and tax monies go to public schools in a proportionate way to guarantee the education, the health, and the safety of our students. But we can't leave nothing off the table. Brothers and sisters who want to homeschool, we got to fight that they get tax dollars as well to make sure they can do the best job they can possibly do. So homeschool, charter school, public school, all of it. All of it. All of it matters for us. Next slide. National Civilian Police Review Board, empowered to investigate all police-involved shootings and killings, empowered to subpoena and prosecute all police officers involved. I'm not going to talk about it too much. We got some literature here. We got some literature up here that you can check out. We do have a campaign back home in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County where we created the momentum for a county-wide civilian police review board. There's only two police review boards. Oh, actually, there's only one in the whole state, and that's here, like in Philadelphia. I don't know how much good it does, but Philadelphia is the only city or municipality that has a comprehensive police review board. Right? No, let me take that back. 2, Philadelphia and the city of Pittsburgh. What we want is a county-wide board that covers all of our county. Why? Think about it. Mike Brown wasn't killed by the St. Louis City Police. He was killed by the police of Ferguson, Missouri. A lot of shootings and killings are happening in small boroughs and small municipalities, involving relatively small police departments that are ill-trained, ill-prepared, highly racist. Hiring practices are very speculative, and it results in our people being shot and murdered, and there's no oversight. So, if you create a county-wide board, you cover all of those police departments. For example, Allegheny County. Allegheny County has the dubious distinction of having, and I want you to listen to this, in Allegheny County, we have more municipalities or more forms of government than any county in the United States of America. In Allegheny County, we have 130 different municipalities with over 100 different police departments. In Allegheny County, you could catch a bus from downtown Pittsburgh, or you could walk if you want to walk, or get in your car. If you go 5 or 10 miles in any direction, you in somebody else's jurisdiction. Where literally they have their own mayor, own borough, own council, and own police force. Right. So we're trying to get rid of that. We want to bring it all together. We want to move policing past the 19th century, like the Wild West, where every sheriff had their 2 or 3 deputies and in different rules, into the 21st century, where there's a comprehensive system of law enforcement that's going to be overseen by us, the people. Next slide. Community control of the police. Next slide. Healthcare. We believe in universal health care, free care for all. Next slide. The environment. We try to keep it simple. Clean air, clean water, healthy food, and environmental justice. Next slide. Next slide. Housing. We demand safe and affordable housing. We want community control of any development and not gentrification. Next slide. Universal debt relief. This is a cliffhanger right here. Most of us, and I think over the last couple of weeks, we saw this with our own eyes. Most of us in this country are, at best, 2 paychecks away from absolute calamity. Many of us, when we were kids, if somebody said, I got a government job, you felt, just like Sister Kathy was saying this morning, you looked at that person as a person who was secure in terms of their financial stability. We now know that just because you got a government job doesn't mean that you're going to be secure. We now know that to be a fact. 800,000 people, right, were basically laid off because of the president who said, I'm shutting the government down. Those 800,000 people fell into calamity, right? So think about all of us today who have a lot of debt. Most Americans, right, we have a lot of debt. We have a lot of student loan debt. Some of us who own property, own personal homes, we have a lot of mortgage debt. Some of us have debt based on our health care situation. We got medical bills. All this stuff is real. So one of the things that we demand as an independent black political party is what we call universal debt relief, right? Debt relief for all people making $250,000 or less. And that would be the vast majority of people in this country, certainly almost all black people that you and I know. Oprah Winfrey would probably be exempt, but outside of Oprah and a few others, almost everybody that we know, right, would fall into this. Because almost everybody that we know have some serious problems around debt. Next. Next. And we're asking for a national plebiscite, which is a vote by black and New African people concerning our decisive and political relationship to the United States, dealing with issues of what we call self-group determination, autonomy, and sovereignty, to be supervised by the United Nations. Next slide. Next slide. And that should be the end. So I just wanted to go through that presentation as quickly as I possibly could. As far as the national plebiscite, we have a campaign which is called the National Campaign for Reparations and Black Self-Determination, which is part of this whole demand around reparations as well as black self-determination. Could I just veer a little bit away from what you had originally wanted to do? I will now entertain questions and comments about the first part of this. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
What is your feeling, or you have in outline how all these things we're found to hold us in bondage that we know? And what is the solution now coming out of this? You mentioned the things, what has happened. We have to in some kind of way really understand what it is that makes us people that we can get out of there, because we wouldn't be in that situation if we didn't have the kind of thinking on one side, thinking on another side that we fall through, and those that are also with you in their mind, which are our color.
Right.
Do you feel or see any outcome of that may be solved kind of way?
Yeah, once again, that's why we have to develop and support independent black political parties and formations. Whether you join our party or you start something different, it has to be independent of both the Republicans as well as the Democrats. It has to be radical, it has to be revolutionary. If it's not radical, if it's not revolutionary, if it's not truly, independent, all it's going to do is perpetuate what we now define as neocolonialism. And neocolonialism is not an isolated phenomenon here for us within the United States. It's happening all throughout the African diaspora, all throughout the African continent. If you go back 50 years ago, say when I was a youngster within the Black Panther Party, and some of you were youngsters within your particular formations as well, and we all were unified, right, in the national liberation struggles that were taking place all around the world, whether it was taking place in Africa or the continent of Africa, whether it was taking place in South America, Central America, Southeast Asia, we were all felt unified, we were part of that. Well, guess what happened? We lost. And we lost not so much the immediate battle, we lost the strategic battles because our enemies and adversaries were able to handpick brothers and sisters who looked like us and put them in positions of power in order to control us, in order to continue to manipulate us and oppress us like long distance. And when I say long distance, I don't mean from another country, I mean not in our face. And so that's the game that they played, and they were very smart and very shrewd in executing that game. So what they have now, they have black mayors and black representatives, right? Your black city council person who basically oppresses you, who basically taxes your community without providing you the representative power that you deserve for your tax dollar. So when we were children, we would say, oh, that's the white man. Well, it ain't the white man no more, it's the black man. Or it's the black woman, right? And so that's what we call neocolonialism, right? We're still a colony of people, we still being oppressed, but just like we talk about being a new African, neo means new. So it's a new style, new form of colonial control and oppression. We're not gonna be out here out front as a white man. I'm not gonna be there because I know I'm a visible target. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna hire some other brother or sister, maybe somebody you went to school with, you played ball with, somebody in your own family. We'll put them out there and have them lead you astray. It's almost like the devil. We talk about the devil from scriptural stuff, it's the Bible, Quran, ancient African texts, whatever. Lead you astray. That force that looks like you, that force that when you try to use your discernment, you say, well, this is me. I am he is me. So he's not going to lead me astray. And he leads you right on astray. That's neocolonialism. And so that's the political phenomena that many of us within the national black community find ourselves in today. Whether it's in Philadelphia, whether it's in Pittsburgh, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Los Angeles, no matter, we have all these black and brown faces who basically support white supremacy, defend white supremacy. That's what they do. Yes, sir.
It seems like to me, this is a capitalist country. So some of the folks that I kind of know, they're making big money off of gentrification.
Right.
There's been politicians right in the neighborhood who got paid off. They put a grocery store, and they moved friends of mine who had a little small produce stand. They made them move. The people don't really want to sell their parents home. But a lot of the gentrification happens within black developers. So it seems to me that we need to get our economics, our banking, our money together so we can pay off the politicians too, the same way they do it. This is an economic, this is a capitalistic system. So money talks, and everything else is not talking quite as loud. You don't have the money to make things happen.
I understand very well your perspective. As a matter of fact, what you just said about buying off the politicians is a perspective of not Dr. Amos Wilson, but what's the other brother who's an economics professor? Claude Anderson. And I disagree with Brother Claude strongly. And I've had this conversation before, not with him personally, but I've had this conversation with people who follow him and people who believe in that type of approach. When you start to get into the thing of paying off politicians, what you will do is you pay them off, you seep deeper and deeper into that mud hole of political corruption, just as they do, right? So it's not about paying off the politicians, and plus that's the easy route to take. The easy route to take is to get a handful of wealthy black people together and say, we're going to pay off the politicians, we're going to own the politicians. But you don't change the nature of the game. And so you get no more power for your people, for your collective, than you had before you cut the check. We are oppressed as a collective. We're not being oppressed as individuals. In other words, if you get pulled over by the police, and if they're targeting black people, they don't pull you over and ask you a series of questions like, are you Democrat? Are you Republican? Are you Rasta? Are you Muslim? Are you Christian? Let me see, are you wearing dreads? Or do you got a fade? They don't do none of that. They pull you over because you're black, right? And Malcolm said it very well. He said the same thing 65 years ago. We're being oppressed not because we're Muslim, not because we're Christian. We're being oppressed not because we're Democrat, not because we're Republican. We're being oppressed because we're black. That still holds true today. We are looked upon as a national body. It makes no difference where we come from. We are looked upon as a national body. It makes no difference whether we're poor, working class, rich, or wealthy. It only makes a difference if we're rich and wealthy once someone identifies who we are. So if they pull Michael Jordan over, or they pull Oprah Winfrey over, and they pull me over, we all gonna be pulled over for the same reason. But once they discover this is Michael and this is Oprah, they're gonna be treated differently. And that's the class conflict within just being black. But as a black person, we all suffer collectively. So my response to what you're saying is that just because we all suffer collectively, our response has to be based on what? Collectivism. The best way to combat gentrification is for us to pool our nickels and dimes together, right? And to fight off and fend off all these developers. And to challenge the black politicians who sell us out. You need to run for office to challenge to sell out. You need to run for office to challenge the sister that's a sellout. Don't let them continue to be a sellout thinking that you're going to come with more money so they can sell out more to you than they sell out more to him. It don't work that way, because they may sell out to you now, but if dude comes with more money, you come with a barrel full of gold, he comes with 2 barrels full of gold, you're going to lose again. So the most effective strategy is to challenge the powers that be for power, and then to collectivize our resources, our money and our votes. Gentleman here, and then gentleman in the back. Yes, sir.
Well, I have 3 points. The first point is, what do you think the woman's role should be
In this whole thing?
This whole thing, that's one. That's the first question. The second question is, how was the message sent out to me? Because I didn't know anything about it. Somebody went to the phone.
Well, I can't answer that question. That's a question that's best answered by the people who organize and people who facilitate the event. I can't answer question number 2. I can answer question number 1. Question number 3? Okay, so, well, I can't speak for the women from Philly. You know, I mean, I could tell you 2 women who I called and asked them to come here, right? I can speak for them too. Those 2 women are my daughters. So I called both of them and told them to show. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll argue about it later on. But the bottom line is this. The role of women is the same as the role of men. Okay? We need brothers and sisters to step up and to be responsible. We need brothers and sisters to run for office. We need brothers and sisters to organize. We need brothers and sisters to teach. Right? Just as it was back in the day. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's going to do everything the same way and to the same degree. Right? But everybody should be standing up and doing what they have to do to contribute to this effort. So the role of the women should be the same as the role of the men in terms of their role. Now, in terms of their duties, the duties may vary depending on skill set and depending on their physical abilities. But their roles are all the same. Leadership roles are all the same. Administrative roles are all the same.
But if we have someone, a sister that organized the Million Woman March, she should be appropriate because she already got
I agree. I mean, you know, look, there's no disagreement coming from me. Okay. Okay, you want to respond to his question?
Yeah, but I'll let you take it.
Yeah, I need to, I got to get his question. It's my brother. Go ahead. What's up, man?
I just wanted to ask how much we have trying to galvanize a lot of blacks down there on celebrities that have financial power to unify, bring together so that we can in some way our children and our youth for future development. So we can prepare young people to be politicians, doctors, and give them the mindset to be able to
That's a struggle, you know, because, I mean, you know, like I know, Ty, like, America is based on the youth culture, number one. America is based on the youth culture. And that's not by mistake. America is based on the youth culture because the economic model and the social structure is based on capitalism. And capitalism is always about, is always looking to find a way to commodify everything, right? It commodifies or it packages and makes into a thing everything and everyone. Capitalism will sell you everything. Some of you may not remember, the older guys we remember, you know, the pet rock days. Remember they had the pet rock. So people came up with an idea, they took a rock from the street, put a string on it, a piece of chain, and people said it was their pet. And people said, oh, that's unique. And people started to pay hundreds of dollars. They had shops that would, you remember that, selling people pet rocks. And people would go to the damn shop, pay $300 or $400 for a rock with a chain on it, right? So capitalism is about commodification. It commodifies everything. And it's a youth culture. It's a youth-centered culture because it's always about the next great thing because it recognizes that young people, being young people, still have to develop that sense of discernment and being able to look at things. In other words, you got to have some history. So before you get that history, we're going to exploit your youth. We're going to sell you everything. We're going to sell you everything under the guise that it's the latest thing that you got to have and you can't live if you don't have the latest coat, jacket, hat, shoes, wallet, cell phone. You know, you got version 5 that came out last month, but version 6 just came out this month. And if you don't get version 6, you ain't going to have no respect amongst your homies, right? That's what capitalism does. So I say all that to say that it's very difficult to get celebrities on board. I think now it's a little easier because of what has happened over the last several years, namely the murders, the police shootings, the police murders. And I think a lot more celebrities are sensitive to the fact that it could be them. It has already happened to people who they grew up with, who they know didn't deserve that. And so I think more and more they have become more sensitized. But they're not as politicized as the celebrities, the black celebrities from the 60s. They haven't got there yet, right? They're taking some steps in the right direction, they just haven't got there yet. So it's an uphill battle, but I think once we can get a few key celebrities on board for something like this, I think we can make some headway. And just to illustrate some recent buzz, Killer Mike, right? He got his show. He came on his show talking about creating a new government to help the black community. You know what he called the new government based in Georgia? New Africa. Think about that. The brother back there, yes sir.
I got a question. Since the system was created to oppress us, we have to work inside the system that was created to oppress us. How do we work inside of the system to overthrow the system that was created to oppress us?
Well, you want me to give you some historical examples of it? Okay. Okay. Well. First of all, you got to be clear about your goals and objectives. We're revolutionary. We're a revolutionary black political party, which means that our ultimate goal is to come up with a new country. That's our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is to have a new country. We would like to call for a new constitutional convention, right? The Black Panther Party tried it. I know you wouldn't know because you ain't old enough to remember. You might know, but you ain't old enough to remember. But here in Philadelphia in 1970, they had a Revolutionary People's Constitutional Convention, right? And they had radicals and revolutionaries come from all across the country. Some came from different countries around the world. And they all convened here in Philadelphia at Temple University at McGonagall Hall, right? That was in 1970. That was called by the Black Panther Party. And so you had people from the Black Panther Party who led it. This was right after Huey P. Newton came home from jail. The Black Panther Party led the initiative, but you have representatives there from the Young Lords Party, the American Indian Movement, the Weather Underground, the Young Patriots, which was the radical militant white boys that Fred Hampton had recruited and organized up in Chicago. Everybody showed up. I was there. I was on security. Okay, so it's been tried before. It wasn't successful because right after that, through COINTELPRO and through jealousy, and envy, the Black Panther Party split. So that was the last major event before the split. And I believe it was orchestrated that way, because that was the beginning. We were calling for a new constitution. And that's what we believe people should be looking at. We should be calling for a new constitutional convention in the city that held the first constitutional convention, Philadelphia. We should be calling for a new constitution to reflect the changing demographics of today. We should be calling for a new constitution to be written by regular people like us, as opposed to the constitution that was written and ratified in 1789 by predominantly slave masters. You know, if you look at the founding fathers, the first 5 presidents, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. Out of the first 5 presidents, 4 of them were slave masters. And they all came from one state. They all came from the state of Virginia. Right? So my point is, yeah, we can do it. We got to fight inside and outside, but not fight inside by joining the Democratic Party or joining the Republican Party. We got to fight inside by establishing our own self-determining organizations and institutions. Going back to something I think the brother in the Brown raised, right? It's difficult to challenge the big-time developers and so forth and so on. Just like we talk about being identified as a collective, as far as being oppressed, our response has to be a collective type of response. So we want to form worker co-ops, job co-ops. We want to find ways to raise capital as a cooperative, so we can purchase some of these lots and houses as a cooperative. Not me saying I'm the big man in charge, so all the money gonna come to me. No, we purchase it and the money comes to us as a group, as a collective. And then we sign some agreements so it stays within the community. And as long as you're part of the collective, you own it. Now if you decide to leave the cooperative, then you know your ownership is gone. But as long as you're part of it, you also own it, you also benefit from it. Yes, sir.
My question is, a lot of, you talk about the presentation I'm very much familiar with, a lot of it, of course, you know, pretty much, you know, my research is based off of the 10-point program, you know, Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, as well as other, you know, influences as you talked about earlier. But you said one thing earlier, I want to ask a question about. You were saying that the new independent political party was not adverse to making alliances with people outside of our community. So it didn't matter if they were, you know, European or Asian or Latino or whatever. I mean, if these are oppressed people and so forth and so on, that you were willing to work with them to be able to come up with I guess, what common goal. So my question is that are there any Europeans within the hierarchical structure of your organization?
No.
Okay.
No, none at all. No. Organization
but yet at the same time, you can formulate alliances and work with them.
Yes, absolutely. For common goals, common objectives. Let me just be brief and illustrate one. One of them would be, for example, here, I told you about the countywide effort to create a civilian police review board. If you go online, look for this, right? You can find it online. We've been working on this now for the last couple of years, right? So we have this committee for the creation of a civilian police review board for Allegheny County. Members of the committee are black and white, right? And so there are people who feel impacted by police brutality and they want to make a change, so they're welcome to join the committee. Now, in terms of our party is made up of folks of African descent. And I don't mean African descent in a very technical way, because technically everybody's of African descent. We all know that. But we're talking about people who are obviously and visibly folks of African descent. That is who makes up our party. Okay, but are we willing to work with other groups? Yes. Yes. Groups who have issues around housing, issues around police brutality, so forth and so on, we're more than willing to work with any of them. But we're very clear in terms of our goals and our objectives. Our long-term goal is revolution. Our long-term goal is to create a different society, a different country. Our long-term goal involves reparations and self-determination for black people. I'm gonna deal with you, and I gotta go to this brother here. Go ahead.
Okay, so that also leads me to the next question. What is that achieve? Okay, long range goals achieve revolution. To what end? In a sense of revolutions are fought for land,
Right.
and thus you win the land. Okay, so what happened to have happened to these existing alliances? Do they dissolve? Do they live on? Do they carry on? Because that's, alliances and things of that nature, working with people or having coalitions and anything are temporary and not necessarily permanent. Once you reach the ultimate goal of revolution, and say if you win revolution from the standpoint of organization and the party, what happens to these alliances with Asians, with whites, with Latinos? What happens to these groups? Because we'll have land, but at the same time, who does it benefit? Does it benefit all, or does it benefit those of us who are of African descent?
It could benefit, first of all, it could benefit us of African descent. It could also be of benefit to people who we had different alliances with, either like historically, or we'll probably develop some new alliances. I want you to think about this, because that's a good question. I want you to think about this. So let's say, for example, we, at some point, we're able to have independent people here, folks of African descent, and our base of operations is in the South, what we call the Black Belt South. That doesn't mean everybody got to live there, but that's our base of operations, right? Well, we still need to have political alliances and military alliances and economic agreements and economic alliances with other people, right? Because we still got to do trade. Contrary to what some brothers and sisters think, we are not going to be a self-contained, completely self-sufficient nation of people. That's fantasy land. We got to grow up. We have to do the things that our ancestors before us and other people continue to do. We're going to have to form strategic alliances for economic reasons, for trade reasons, for military reasons, for intelligence gathering reasons. When we talk, when many of us use the term nation building, most of us don't know what the hell we're talking about. Real nation building involves what I just described. Real nation building. And so it requires that type of strategic thinking, long-term thinking. Nation building is a lot more than just wearing the red, black, and green, or quoting Marcus, or quoting the Black Panthers. Nation building really means thinking like we have to build the nation. Thinking like, I mean, look around the room, who do I need to form some type of alliance with? Thinking like we're going to need food. Thinking like we're going to need medical supplies. And, God forbid, thinking like we may need some weapons and ammunition, right? So I'm saying we got to start to think like big boys and big girls, right? And really think about what it means to build and to sustain an independent nation of 45 to 50 million black people and any other people who may come later. Yes, sir.
Are you producing it? In a sense of we have our nation. And this is something I always think about all the time when I'm reading my study. Are you producing the weapons? Are you producing the ammunition for the weapons? Are you producing the medical equipment, the medicines, and the various other things? Have the hospitals, have these things in place, or are you in a sense bartering and trading with individuals who do have these needs because you don't have these needs at your disposal at the time?
I think it's going to be a little bit of all that, especially like in the beginning. I think that ultimately the goal is to be as engaged in much, to engage in as much group production as we possibly can. You are as sovereign as you want to be. Check this out, brother. Every sovereign nation on this planet trades with other nations. Every last one, including this one. That's why this nation today has a trade deficit, right? So every sovereign nation on the earth trades with other nations, and every sovereign nation on the earth before you and I were even thought of traded with other nations. So we talk about the African presence in the Americas. We talk about before 1619, before slavery, before servitude. Our ancestors came here exploring and they traded. They traded with the people who were here. They traded amongst themselves throughout the continent of Africa. So all sovereign nations still engage in trade because no one sovereign people is completely self-contained. Because, you know, I may have it going on, 5 or 6 states down south. But some people from China may have something that we need. Some brothers and sisters from the continent have something that we need. Some people from the Middle East have something that we need. Some people from South America got some things that we need. So we're going to have to develop some trade agreements with them. And so that's all part of nation building. And that's all part of that strategic thinking and long-term planning that we need to start to engage in. This brother here. Oh, we running out of time? Oh, okay.
Let me say something to the audience, because I don't want the focus of what we're trying to do to get far afield. We understand that we need some type of African-centered leadership in these communities. I'm not necessarily talking about statewide national offices where you got to cater to white folks voting for you. A lot of these offices, and the term politics being local, a lot of these community offices and council people don't use much money to win these seats.
Sure don't.
They use organization. That's what we need. I don't want the conversation to get afar. We realize that we need some other type of political leadership. We need some other type of political leadership than what we have right now. That should be our focus. That should be our focus right now. We can't keep telling our people, and I'm not saying that nobody here is doing that. We can't keep telling our people, vote Democratic Party. The Democratic Party had their convention here, what, in 2016, 17, well, I forgot, and I don't care. But they came up with a mantra that the Democratic Party was the voice of the middle class. Where does that leave you as a black person? You're not middle class. And for those of us that think they are, miss 2 paychecks and you'll be working poor again. So when the Democratic Party, and I ain't even talking about Republicans, they off the table. When the Democratic Party say they're the voice of the middle class, they're not talking about you. They're not. So where does that leave us? That's what we need to focus on. You know, and let me give a couple of examples. This stuff that's been going on with Mark Lamont Hill, and who's local, and Tamika Mallory, who's not local. Mark Lamont Hill, they came after him because he made statements in reference to Palestine and how Zionist Israel is off the chain. They came after him. Now, politicians here, because he's a Temple professor, these politicians that we all know, they know him personally. Did you hear any of them have any press conference to say anything in his behalf? Did you hear it? I haven't. Tamika Mallory. The Democratic Party pulled their sponsorship of that women's march that she was a part of because she made references to Minister Farrakhan, who's a personal friend of her family for years, and that she respected his work. Now, if you do a little research, you see why these state representatives and state senators who are black didn't say anything. In 2016, this old white governor who black people voted for, Wolf, sponsored some anti-BDS, which is anti-Israel legislation, where you can't say, if you got a state contract or anything else, you can't get it if they find out that you made some type of speech or supported anything. If I go on my Facebook page and put something up that, or maybe a Louis Farrakhan speech, and they find out, and I got a state contract where maybe I'm cleaning up a state building, cutting grass around a state building, I can lose my contract because of that. Now, if you look and see who voted for that, look at your state representatives and your state senator. Hardy Williams Jr., the other guy out there in Winfield that got the actress wife. All these people voted for that legislation. Did they tell you they voted for it? anti-Israel legislation where black people can't say anything against Israel? They didn't tell you they voted for it. They did. Look it up. It's a matter of public record. They don't represent you. What we going to do if we can't keep complaining about these people? We got better sense than that. We can do something about it. And it don't take much, just organization.
I agree.
And let me say something, brother, to what you said about women being involved. Time for Awakening Media, which I have, is doing this. We hosted the first Time for an Awakening Media. Put this on. We hosted the first one in October. I reached out to people that I knew were activists in this city. 4 men and 4 women. One of the women is pregnant and she's supposed to deliver today. She's not here. One of the other sisters are here. You see her right there.
I just found out today.
Yeah, well, I did send the invitations out because you were part of the first panel. It's women involved in this. Women are not excluded. Now, you might not have heard it because we're using social media to do this. You see this here, I use my own money. I'm not going to the station that black people are familiar with here in the city and they charge me $1,000. I'm not doing that. I don't have that kind of money. You know, at one time, before the owner died, they had a certain amount of block time for community announcements. After the owner died and his children took over, they cut that out. You don't have any community announcements anymore, public service announcements anymore. Everything on there you got to pay for, and I don't have the money. So we got to use the drum beat like our ancestors. I'll put it on social media and use other people to network, and the word gets out. But either way, we got to do something about our situation. We see these elected officials helping these gentrifiers, and we don't do nothing about it. We got to hold them responsible. They turn the community in and then come right and live among the community again. Like ain't nothing. They don't fear no retribution from you. And I'm not talking about you specifically. I'm talking about all of us. They stick it to you and they figure, oh, he ain't gonna do. Listen, I went to a meeting up there when that Curtis Jones put that sign up there for Wilson Good, who burned black men and women, children in a house. And he said, well, listen, he was my mentor, and I'm not going to do anything about it. I could do something. I'm not going to do anything about it. He stood in front of a church full of black people and basically gave him his behind to kiss. So what do we do about it? What we going to do about it? No, I don't want, it's not right now. In fact, right now I want to go to the panel, which you're a member of, Sister Fillet. I want to go to the panel to get them to ask questions on what they heard being presented.
Well, I'd like to get to this part of the piece, just the second part, which I think gets to the heart of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But I just didn't want things to go far.
No, it's fine. I appreciate that intervention. I think it was needed. I appreciate that. I think we needed that type of intervention to kind of bring us back to where we should be in terms of staying grounded and being grounded. So what I'd like to do now, this is the second presentation, so to speak. Thanks, brother. It's good to see you, bro. So this is a presentation that we did on a regular basis in terms of PE class. Right? Electoral politics and Black New African liberation, right? So we started the first one of these almost 5 years ago, October of 2014. We start the slide. So the content, basically, New African Independence Party, who we are, we've already went through that. Politics, everything is political. And then we get to the opportunities and limitations of electoral politics. Then we're talking about basic civics and local politics, understanding your state, your county, and local government. Voting for a candidate, what to look for before casting your vote. And then running for public office, what you need to know and what you need to do. Next slide. So some of this stuff we already went through. Who we are, National Independent Black Political Party, founded in 2012, activated in 2014. Next slide. Politics, everything is political. Politics, the struggle concerning the acquisition and distribution of power and resources. Everything is political. Our lives are shaped and influenced by politics, where we are born, where we go to school, our neighborhood, our social and our economic status. And last but not least, what some of us learned 50 years ago, that politics is war without bloodshed. And then war is politics with bloodshed. So we say politics is war. But we have to look at it that way. Politics is a war, but it's a war without bloodshed. And when the political contradictions get to a certain point where they can no longer be resolved through marches, protests, demonstrations, or voting for his or her favorite candidate, then it becomes a war. And then it's still political. Because if you're fighting a war, you have to have some political goals and objectives in mind. If you don't, it's stupid. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's like if you boxing, you know, your goal is to win the fight. If you in the ring just because you want to fight somebody that day, you're a fool, right? Straight up. So politics is war without bloodshed, and war is politics with bloodshed. Next slide. So the opportunities of electoral politics, the opportunities that do exist, and this is what the brother, I do believe, was referring to, the opportunities of electoral politics. It can give power to your voice and the collective voice of the people that you claim to represent. It can shape and formulate the laws, the rules, the regulations, and public policy. And it can advocate and secure resources for your constituency. That is your neighborhood, your community, or your district. So that's the value of engaging in electoral politics, right? Now, a brother had asked me a question about, I think it was the brother in the back, about fighting within the system, fighting outside the system. How does that look? How is that going to be beneficial? And I said, well, I could give you some historical examples. So I'll give you a couple of historical examples that are easy to research. The Chinese Revolution, October 1949, Cuban Revolution in 1956, 57, somewhere around there. And the reason I say that, because most people, when you say the Chinese Revolution, they have an image of Mao Zedong leading the Communist Party, guns, rifles in hand, thousands and thousands of soldiers. When you say the Cuban Revolution, they have an image of Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, leading the people in the Cuban Revolution, shooting at Batista, who was an arch enemy puppet representing United States interests. So that's the image. But guess what? Before it got to that point, in Cuba and in China, they had mass protests, mass demonstrations, boycotts, all types of stuff that they engaged in before it got to that point. Most of us know about Brother Nelson Mandela. Many of us in this room were part of the campaign to free Nelson Mandela. Most people don't realize that Nelson Mandela was not a non-violent activist. Nelson Mandela was arrested because at that point, the ANC said we need to engage in armed struggle. And so they got together, they conspired, they started to get their weapons together, and they were going to fight physically, right? And I'm not sure whether he was betrayed or not, but he landed in prison. So he wasn't like an advocate of nonviolence. He had got to their point, or they had got to that point within their struggle. They had marched, they had protested, they had demonstrated, they had boycotted, they did all the stuff that we do today, right? But then they got to that point, they said, it's time for us to engage in armed resistance, right? And so that's what I'm saying. It's all part of it. You know, oftentimes we see the end result and we think that's it. You know, it's like you go into the movie theater and all you see is the last 5 minutes of the movie and you say, damn. So you walk out the movie theater with a certain impression about the characters, the plot, the whole thing. You done missed an hour and a half, dude, right? You focusing on the end. You focusing on them scrolling through the credits, right? But you ain't really paid attention to the whole movie, the whole story from beginning to conclusion. And so that's what revolution is. Revolution is not an event, it's a process. Like I tell some of the younger brothers back home, you know, because they be like, Brother Khalid, and I just say, check this out, brother. I said, how long did it take you to get here? What do you mean by that, brother? I said, how long did it take you to get here? He said, well, wait. I said, it took you about 9 months to get here, a week or two. Right? So they start laughing because they know what I'm talking about. It's a process. To give birth is a process. To bring about a new society, a new way of thinking, a new structure. It's a process. Just like it took us most of us 9 months, take a couple of weeks to get here. It's going to take that process for us to give birth to a new country, to a new society, to a new way of thinking, to a new culture. So let's go back to what we have to do locally. So the opportunities of electoral politics, again, number 3, advocate and secure resources for your constituency, your neighborhood, your community, or your district. Next slide, please. The limitations of electoral politics. These are the limitations. The process is disproportionately influenced and dominated by the rich and wealthy, mostly white men and white women. That's real. So at some point, we would have to also push for things like campaign finance reform. Now that's just a limited reform, but it's something that we need to push for because it makes our position stronger, right? Do you know, for example, that in certain countries around the world, when people run for political office, the government guarantees X number of cash for all the candidates. They get X number well, not cash in some cases, but they get X, they all get the same amount of, say, time on the TV, on the radio, on the press. And then in some instances, they get cash for their campaign. But everybody gets the same amount, right? And you know where you find this happening? You find this happening in a lot of European countries when they deal with electoral politics, especially the Scandinavian countries, the Scandinavian nations, right? So what they do, if we run it for office, we all get the same amount of money. We all get X number of hours of TV time, X number of hours of media exposure. And then you run your race and may the best person win. So that minimizes the opportunity for corruption. But anytime you have a political system that's inundated and dominated by finance and money, it can't help but be corrupted. You know, one of the largest bodies in Washington, D.C., one of the largest bodies and one of the most effective bodies, well, let me rephrase it. One of the largest bodies in Washington, D.C. is the Congress, right? That's the 100 U.S. senators and 435 members of the House of Representatives. But one of the most effective bodies in Washington are the lobbyists, which don't number, they're not that many of them, but they're highly effective. The lobbyists, they represent the National Rifle Association. They represent the oil companies. They represent the doctors, the hospitals, the healthcare providers, right? That is really the most effective group in Washington, D.C. And the only reason they're as effective as they are is because we have a political system that allows so much money to dominate. So campaign finance reform is certainly one of the things we need to advocate at some point. So the limitations. Process is disproportionately influenced and dominated by the rich and wealthy, mostly white men and women. Structurally, it favors the traditional two-party system of Democrats and Republicans. It's a hard battle to run as an independent. It's a hard battle. Now, in my city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, it's a hard battle, but it's doable. And I know it's doable here too. It's doable. Just as the brother said, it's not about necessarily the lack of money as it is about the lack of will and determination and the lack of organization. You're absolutely correct, right? With determination and will and with organizing, you can beat a lot of these local candidates who represent these two parties of white supremacy. You can beat them. You can beat them. The only thing they really got going for them is money. Most of them don't really believe in half the stuff they say. Most of them are more concerned about getting in office, and if they're already in office, they're concerned about staying in office until they die, right? So think about that. He's absolutely correct. The political process can be slow and extremely partisan. So if you're the Campbell's instant soup revolutionary, then electoral politics ain't gonna work for you. It ain't gonna work for you, because it ain't instant soup, it ain't oatmeal, where you just, pour the water in and throw it in the microwave and stir it up. It ain't about that. Electoral political struggle takes time and it takes patience, right? It takes strategic thinking, strategic planning. It takes time and it takes patience in order for it to grow, in order for it to have some type of impact. How many of you heard of like the Tea Party? Let me see a show of hands. Okay, so let me tell you what the Tea Party did. About 20-something years ago, what the Tea Party did, and by the way, most people don't even know what the Tea Party is. Some people think the Tea Party is a separate political party. It isn't. The Tea Party is actually a caucus. It's a wing of the Republican Party. They went against elements within their own party around basically one issue. It wasn't an issue of racism. It was an issue of balancing the budget. Their whole thing was, we need to have what they call a balanced budget. Right? We need a balanced federal budget. That's what the Tea Party was pushing. And so what they decided to do, and they were very smart, they said, well, because they were being marginalized. The mainstream Republicans, whether they were moderate or they were conservative, they were marginalized in the Tea Party. Oh, they ain't really Republicans. Oh, they too far out of what the Republican Party stands for. They don't understand politics and finance reform and all that. So the Tea Party said, this is what we're going to do. They got their people together and they started to run for every local office in their district. And they didn't all do it by communicating on the phone all at once across the country. But say Philadelphia County Tea Party guy says, okay, well look, you run for dog catcher, you run for this, you run for that. Well, I don't know if I can win, but run anyway, you might win. And that's what they did. And then they communicated with one another in different counties within their state. Then they came up with a statewide agenda. Then the states communicated with other states across the country. And so you look up, most of the so-called right-wing Republican politicians or conservative politicians that we know of today, guess where they got their start, y'all? Say it. Tea Party. They ran for dog catcher. They ran for trash collector. They ran for the school board 20 years ago. Now they are senators and congresspeople. Okay? Speaker of the House people. That's how they did it. They were very smart. They were very strategic. And they laid the seed. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, they was boogieing. They was partying. You know, they had what? They had Obama, for Obama. They had Clinton, you know, the white supremacist racist who locked up all the black and brown people he could as he played the saxophone, right? So I'm saying, Democrats was lunching. The Tea Party element within the Republican Party said, we want a real radical change for the conservatives. And so they thought strategically. They ran their people in all the local offices. They developed local caucuses, then countywide caucuses, then statewide caucuses. And now, guess what? Who do you think, what party has the most governors out of all the governors in the country? What party, y'all? Republican Party. Republican Party. We got 50 states. Almost every state is ran by a Republican who has a strong constituency and base with the Tea Party. You see what I'm saying? So the brother's right. Local politics do matter. It matters tremendously. You got to have local stuff before you get to national stuff, right? So we got to start in Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia City, Philadelphia County. How many of you know, for example, that like 60 years ago, Philadelphia City and Philadelphia County combined as one? Do you know that? Y'all don't realize that it still is, exactly. It's not like that where I come from in Pittsburgh. It's different. Different city, different county government. They moving towards it, but there's always a lot of negative pushback. That's a golden opportunity for the brothers and sisters here, because you can lock it all down. See, we got to lock down a little bit of city, then lock down a little bit of county. Y'all can lock down city and county, one swoop. One swoop. And you can do it as independents. You don't have to be Democrats to do it, because the Democratic Party's hold is not really all that strong. The Democratic Party is on the ropes right now. Democratic Party is fighting amongst themselves. Why? Because they have a younger element that's been influenced by Bernie Sanders and financed by some other people that is trying to put forth what they call a liberal progressive agenda. Now, what does that mean for the black community? That means we're going to give you a little bit of relief, but you ain't going to get no freedom. That's what that progressive agenda really means. It means that we're going to give you some privileges, but you ain't going to have no power. It means you're going to be able to smoke weed if you want to smoke weed. It means if you're from the LGBTQ community, you can do that. It means that, you know, we're going to take some of the young folks out of prison who've been incarcerated. It means, you know, no more juvenile life or serving life without parole. And all that's some good stuff for people, for those from whom it matters. But it ain't freedom and liberation. And that's what that progressive agenda does. It clouds the issue, and it clouds the minds of the people. You think you got freedom, but all you really embrace is a much more sophisticated way to maintain your oppression. You see what I'm saying? So we got to talk about a revolutionary, radical black agenda, right? That's what we have to stand on. We got to say to everybody who's running for office, what's your position on reparations? And if they say, well, that's too divisive. Well, we can't vote for you. How you gonna say it's too divisive to give reparations for black people, but it's okay to give reparations to Israel? It's okay to give reparations to the Japanese Americans. It was okay to give reparations to other people, but not black people. They say, well, what's your position on more power for black people? Well, what do you mean by that? Proportional representation. What's your position on that? Oh, I don't know if we could do that. Well, then that means we can't vote for you either. So, you know, we got to ask the hard questions, ask the hard choices, the things that matter to us as black people. What about freedom for political prisoners? What about freedom for Brother Mumia as a condition for getting our vote? You know, we got to ask real tough, hard questions, man, in order to have a really, truly independent, radical, revolutionary black political party. If not, you're going to get sucked up, people are going to come to you and buy you off, and you're going to get co-opted. And you're going to become known as the radical wing of the Democrats. And you don't want to do that. You want to be independent. I tell people all the time, if you want to be a free people, you want to be an independent people, you got to start to think like an independent and free people, and then you got to act like an independent and free person. You can't be free, you can't be independent if you're still holding on to the slave master's political formation as if it's your own. And he's already shown you that he has no interest in freeing you or liberating you. He's clearly shown it. After 60 years of loyalty to the Democratic Party, what does the national collective black community have to show for it? Mass incarceration, gentrification, police brutality, school crisis, drug problems, gang, youth violence problems, on and on and on and on. Come on, man. And then we got people who look like us still trying to sell us that bottle of snake oil. Oh, brother, just vote straight Democrat. You know it's the way to go. And then they try to give you the boogeyman thing. Every 2, 4, 6 years we get the boogeyman. Okay, brother, you don't want to vote for the Republicans because if you go that way. So you vote for the Democrats. Stuff still stay the same, don't change. Then 4 more years go by. Oh, brother, you better vote straight Democrat again. You like, okay, vote straight Democrat again. Stuff still the same. And so they keep selling us the boogeyman. The Republican Party becomes the boogeyman to be used to benefit the Democratic Party as they control, right, and have, hegemony over the black vote. We got to break that, man. We got to say later for that. Stop trying to sell us the snake oil. We want to be free. We want to be liberated. And the first step is to have our own political formations. Next slide. So what do you think? So now, I got to warn you, because I know all y'all smart, all y'all intelligent brothers and sisters. This is a trick question. This is a trick question. I want you to think about what you know, what you read, and what we talked about so far this afternoon. So, what do you think? If voting didn't change anything, we would still have no women's rights, no public schools, no 40-hour work week, no Civil Rights Act, no Social Security, no Medicare, Medicaid, no food assistance, no minimum wage, no workers' compensation, no environmental laws, no safe abortions for those who do that, no consumer protections, and no right to health insurance. If voting didn't change anything, what do you say to that?